is that if you were a writer and you were trying to keep all the techniques I'm about to say, and even the ones that I described for Wally, in mind, while you were writing, you would go insane because they can't be done. There's just too many of these techniques, and they take a lot of thought to apply artfully. So what you want to do is apply these when you're rewriting, not on the first draft. And the second thing that I didn't say about emotioneering techniques is they are not directed at people's conscious minds. They are directed at people's subconscious. These techniques are being used on you in every great film or TV show or piece of architecture that you experience. And the reason you don't notice them is because they work so well that they draw you emotionally into being engaged with that film or TV show or architecture or pair of shoes or shirt or piece of furniture. Yeah. And because you're emotionally involved, you can't be outside, distant from it, analyzing it. So these are the techniques that cause emotional engagement. They are directed at the subconscious. That's why it took me a long time to figure them out. So first of all, let's talk about Sam and Frodo on the rock. First, let's go through some of the empathy techniques. They're heroic. They've performed an act of self-sacrifice to save the world. They're in danger. They're loyal to each other. And they're experiencing pain and sorrow for everything that they've gone through and for the fact that they're about to die. 5 empathy techniques on both of them. Now we get into another type of emotioneering technique, which is, I said there were 7 layers to a character. Another one are those techniques that give a character or a piece of architecture or a painting emotional depth. And let's talk about some of these techniques for creating emotional depth, which are used in this particular scene. Well, one of them we've already seen with Wally. Wally had an unfulfilled dream, which was to have someone's hand to hold. You might remember that. We talked about that. Right. Well, Sam has an unfulfilled dream. He wants to marry Rosie, and he's never going to get the chance, or at least he doesn't think he's going to get the chance, as far as we know, in this particular scene. Unfulfilled dream. And that causes both empathy. I guess it should have been on the empathy list up there, too. They also have pain and sorrow, which was on the empathy list, is also on the character deepening list. That's the list of techniques to give the character a sense of emotional complexity or emotional depth or emotional layers or poignancy or soulfulness, however you want to say it. The next thing is that they feel 2 things at once. And the most emotional depth has to do with layers. So if you ever gone out and seen a sunset where there are layers of clouds, there might be a thin layer of clouds stretched high up in the sky and then some big, bulky, pretty clouds that look like cotton balls a little bit lower. And you see the light going through these layers and you could just stare at it forever. Layers gives it emotional depth. Sometimes you look into water and you see the layer of the surface of the water, and then you see, things in the water, fish or turtles if you've been to the Bahamas, and then you see the layer of what's on the surface, on the ground, below the water. I was in the Caribbean looking at fish and turtles, snorkeling around. I saw the surface of the water, the animals in the water, which are alive, and then the water was so clear you could see what was on the ground below, at the bottom of the water. And these different layers give emotional depth, and they were beautiful. So here, the layers for Sam and Frodo is they feel different things at the same time. They're glad to have saved the world and conquered Sauron, but they're sad that they're going to die. Now, another so we're talking about here techniques that give the feeling of emotional depth to these characters. The next technique is, I call it being alone in a crowd. You see a person who's walking through a crowd, and they're all alone. You might remember the film Schindler's List and the little girl in red who's wandering around lost, feeling very sad. She's lost her family. And Schindler notices this little girl in red. This is near the beginning of the film when the Jews are first being rounded up. Well, another form of alone in the crowd is everybody else may be happy and your character is sad. In fact, kind of that's what happens here, is Frodo is revived when he comes to Minas Tirith, which is this elven village, and his eyes open, and Gandalf is there laughing, and then his various friends enter the room from who he hadn't seen in quite a long time, and Gimli and Aragorn and others, and Merry and Pippin. They're all laughing, and then the last person to enter the room is Sam, and he and Sam exchange this very poignant look, because they've gone through a hell that none of the others can ever understand, but everyone else is still laughing, and they're alone in a crowd. Character deepening moments. Now, just as you can have emotional depth to a character, you can also have emotional depth to a scene, and let's talk about a few of what I call scene deepening techniques. What gives emotional depth to the scene? Okay. And there are techniques here as well. One is when they're up on that rock and they think they're going to die, there is layers. There's a kind of violence around them of the
lava,
the mountain. Yeah, the lava, which is flowing out of the mountain, but a stillness on the rock. So again, we've got two different things going on, two different emotions at the same time. And also, when they were alone in the crowd, at the end, it's another technique too, which is a scene deepening technique. I call it one scene, two universes. You have two people or two groups in the same scene, but they're in such different emotional states that they might as well be in two different universes. I'm not sure if you've ever seen an old film called Jerry Maguire. Jerry gets fired from his job, and he's in an elevator with Renee Zellweger playing the character of Dorothy, who quit to join him and be his secretary. And he's in this elevator, going down the elevator, and he's panicking, trying not to panic, but he's sweating and he's panicking. And she is in love with him. And all she can do is think how lucky she is to be in this elevator and starting a company with this hot guy who she has a crush on. And in fact, this deaf couple enters the elevator, and in sign language, the man says to the woman, "You complete me." Well, that's actually another emotioneering technique. It's a character deepening technique. It's called character A expresses what character B is feeling. She's feeling the love, but it's expressed by the deaf couple. I could show you other examples in film where this is done as well.
Right.
But anyway, it's actually very funny to see her looking at him with love, and he's just in a panic. I call it one scene, two universes. They're in the same scene, but they might as well be in two different universes. And it's a same thing here. Sam and Frodo are in quite a different universe than Merry and Pippin and the others.
Right.
Again, so we have layers. Now, there are other techniques involved, and actually...
does that, sorry to interject, but does that draw the viewer in more, because emotionally it's very complex, and you even have a multitude of different characters and different emotions that you can identify with, or how do you think the viewer handles that situation, because it must be very complex in one way, right?
Well, I think that you've actually hit the nail on the head. All of these techniques on Lord of the Rings, and there's others that I don't have time to get into. There's an article on the Beyond Structure website called How to Write an Unforgettable Scene. And not only do I have this scene from Lord of the Rings analyzed, I also have the same film clip there. And people can read all these techniques and the ones that I don't have time for. But you haven't seen the article, but you actually just summed it up very, very articulately. The summation is that to create a great scene, it's not one emotioneering technique. It's many, many happening at the same time.
Right.
In a Van Gogh painting, there are many, many emotioneering techniques happening at the same time. Or a house by Frank Lloyd Wright, or any other great architect you know. And let's transition to architecture. Now, many of these techniques, which you can apply to a character, you can apply to Diesel jeans, to a brand. You can apply it to Apple computers. You can apply them to all sorts of things. But there are also techniques in design which don't apply. for instance, what is emotional depth in architecture? Or in product design? Well, soft, glowing light, especially where we don't see the light source. A lot of times you'll see light in fancy hotel lobbies, or restaurants. The light is soft and glowing or reflected off of a wall. Mm. And believe it or not, that is a form of visual emotioneering. But in product design or architecture, you also get into techniques that don't apply to some. There is some overlap, but I just gave you one that is not. Here's another one that does not. Meaningfulness. What is meaningfulness? When you go, that shirt is really meaningful to me. That shirt has a lot of meaning to me. Or my car has a lot of meaning to me.
Right.
Or my sailboat has a lot of meaning to me. So one thing that causes meaningfulness, this is an emotioneering technique, is something that takes a lot of time, that you invest a lot of time in. So my father likes to sail sailboats. And, it takes so much time to get to get everything adjusted correctly. You've got what they call tune a sailboat. There's many different things to adjust after the winter snows are gone and you put it in the water. To get everything set up again takes a lot of time. And then you've got to clean the bottom of the boat. He's got a small boat, so you can lift it out of the water. You've got to clean it on a regular basis so that seaweed and algae don't grow to the bottom and slow it down. And it takes a lot of upkeep, tremendous amount. And then the sails need to be folded in a certain way so that the way that they wrinkle don't slow the sailboat down. Anyway, in video games, for instance, in World of Warcraft, people invest a lot of time in building up the character, and they have to, their character gets stronger and more powerful and more able the more time that they invest. So it becomes more meaningful. Another thing that makes things meaningful is that they provide a number of functions or in the person's life instead of just one function. If you have a vase in your house, you can put flowers in it. So that is one function. But if it also looks beautiful when there's no flowers in it, now it provides two functions. It is a beautiful object in your house, and maybe you keep it there on a pedestal or on your windowsill, even when there's no flowers in it because you like the way it looks, and it holds flowers. Now, of course, it also has a scene deepening aspect. It lifts you up to a spiritual wavelength because beauty and spirit, the wavelength of spirit and beauty are very, very closely identified. And maybe there is also a significant historical aspect to it, which is another form of meaningfulness. Maybe it was given to you as a Christmas gift by a dear friend. And so it has that emotional connotation. I had a friend of mine in high school who was a writer. He wanted to be a writer, and he had a clipboard with a rusting little metal hinge on it, just a clipboard. But this clipboard belonged to T.S. Eliot. And anyone else would think it's a piece of junk, but because of its historic significance to him, it was his most valuable object.
Right.
And therefore, that's another aspect of meaningfulness. But in San Francisco, which is a beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've traveled the world a lot. LA, where I'm talking to you from, has probably more creative people than any city that I've ever seen in the world. You want great painters, great musicians. You want great writers, great dancers. Oh my God. LA is an ugly city with great weather, but we have a lot of creativity. But we're not a pretty city. San Francisco is unique because if you go to San Francisco, you'd be amazed on the walls of so many people's homes are framed posters of San Francisco. I don't think I've ever been to a city where people put up posters of their own city. Now, people in New York do this as well, and maybe people in Paris do too. I don't know. But San Francisco has more of this because there's so many beautiful things in San Francisco, and they especially like posters of the Golden Gate Bridge taken at different times of day or in different weather conditions.
Right.
Now, the Golden Gate Bridge is one of the most beautiful bridges in the world. It's not the most beautiful. There are bridges that are most beautiful, but it is very beautiful in different lights, and people in San Francisco love their bridge. And so I'm going to end this discussion by talking a little bit about the Golden Gate Bridge. And if you've never